Chris, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
Thriving, thank you.
Fantastic. I expect nothing less. So your story is incredible. You are genuinely lucky to be alive. But before we talk about some of the remarkable experiences that you've had, can you take us back to a young Chris Moon? What was your childhood like and what were your ambitions?
I grew up in the countryside. I come from a farming background. Um, Everyone in my family was either a farmer or a soldier. So I guess I grew up in what was then in England that was almost 40 years behind the times in a very small village. It was a wonderful place to grow up with flowers, trees, and the natural world. And I used to run to school.
Brilliant, like Forrest Gump.
Yes, except I might not have been as fast as Forrest Gump.
That's a fantastic picture. Brilliant. And what were your ambitions? What were you hoping to do when you grew up?
I wanted to be a farmer or a soldier for a bit. And by the age of 21, remarkably, I'd achieved my life's ambition. I was in a farming partnership. We were doing really well. And unfortunately, my partner's knees and hips gave up on him, which was how I ended up going to the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst, and becoming an army officer.
Fantastic. And how did you end up being kidnapped by the Khmer Rouge?
Well, I had a wonderful time in the army. I was very lucky. I did 3 years in operations in an anti-terrorist role, stopping people being taken apart. And that was something I wanted to continue. So I left to work for a charity clearing landmines in Asia and Africa. And we were given a guarantee of security by the United Nations, who had a huge operation in Cambodia, of which we were part of. But unfortunately, something happened that no one had predicted. It was only my second day in the minefield, and we were in a border area. We were ambushed. I was taken prisoner with two of my Cambodian colleagues, and I was told that I was a Khmer Rouge prisoner of war, which frankly doesn't bode well. And we were incredibly fortunate to survive. And I go back to Cambodia regularly. I've been there twice this year already. And speaking to my old Cambodian friends, we were just incredibly lucky to live. There were 7 times when they talked about killing us, and it was possible to change the way they felt. When finally I negotiated our release, we went back to the village where we were originally taken prisoner, and we arrived in the middle of the night. And because the local people believe that ghosts come out of the forest at night, they had been told I would be executed, and they believed I was a ghost, so they all ran away from me.
Oh my goodness, wow. That's incredible. But I mean, how did you negotiate your release? Did you have special training?
No, and I think it was quite helpful to really work everything out as I went. Firstly, I understood a huge amount about the people I was dealing with, and since I was taken prisoner more than 20 years ago, we've analysed it in great detail with people who understand kidnap and negotiation. And I've become friends with the Khmer Rouge commander who made the decision about whether or not we lived or died. And as a result of making that decision, he himself was seen as ideologically impure. So they sent people to execute him. And he heard about this and he defected. And it was one of the biggest defections, bringing an end to the fighting. So it's a really long answer, but it taught me so much about conquering our own fear, about not giving up, about maintaining hope, about not giving in to the badness, and that no matter what, we have to find the good in people. And maybe that's our battle in life, to make the best of it. And unfortunately, I was able to influence our commander and explain to him that what I was doing was a good thing, clearing landmines. It was in line with his own ideals of protecting the local people. But it was a close run thing. And when I met him many, many years later, he said, "You didn't understand that I was there simply to rubber stamp your execution. But I decided you were a good person like me. And so I was able to intervene, and I knew that I had to do a good thing and prevent your execution."
Wow, amazing, amazing. Really incredible experiences. So you dodged that one, but in 1995, while supervising mine clearance, you were blown up, and that was in Mozambique. Can you tell us what happened that day?
Ironically, the 7th of March 1995, the day I was blown up, I was doing the least dangerous thing I ever did. I was walking in a safe area where all the landmines had been removed, but it wasn't possible for really complex technical and behavioral reasons for the deminers to locate one landmine. So I was walking in the middle of a safe area. I still remember it all these years on in the present tense because it was so extreme. It was just like being a prisoner. You never forget these experiences. I took 3 paces, and the weirdest thing of all, I remember feeling that something was wrong. So I trusted my instincts. I turned around, I took 3 paces, and then I heard the loudest bang I've ever heard. And the strange thing was, the silence was louder than the explosion. I didn't lose consciousness. I treated myself. That was why I survived. And I was incredibly fortunate to survive. And the surgeon said he'd never seen anybody live with such a small amount of blood. Life is truly a gift we take for granted.
My
and I
good.
remind myself of that every day because you so quickly forget.
Absolutely. But again, how did you know what to do? Was it instinct again, or did you know?
We had very good medical training, but also by then I'd had such a huge amount of operational experience. To say it was normal would be entirely wrong, but I was very used to dealing with injured people, and I still had my job to do. I was still running that program. And whatever we do in life, the more reasons we can find for doing it, the happier we will be. Find your reasons. And I couldn't die because I passionately believed in what I did clearing landmines and protecting innocent people. So I couldn't die because I knew it would be really bad for funding for my program. So I had to find a way to live.
I mean, in your book, you actually said it was easier to die than to stay alive, though. So what was the turning point for you that said, no, I'm going to fight this?
The weirdest thing is, death is nothing to fear. It was pleasant, drifting off. It was like going to sleep, going to a familiar place. I suppose I remember it as like slipping into a warm pool of water. And it was so lovely and safe and calm. And then every now and again, I just managed to stick my head up, and it felt like, strange enough, there was somebody just putting my head up. And so I couldn't move on, although I knew I was. And the reason was very simple. I didn't want to give in to the badness, and I passionately believed in what I was doing, so I couldn't die. And it came back to, well, actually, if I do, I'm letting my program down. It'll be bad for funding for my program.
Brilliant. I love it. I love it. And you've got absolutely no bitterness. You don't blame anybody for what happened to you.
No, it's, I mean, look, the unfortunate thing, if I may be direct with everyone, look, shit happens to all of us. Nobody wants to be near a bitter person, and we've got to wipe it off because nobody wants to be next to somebody with that stuff stuck to them. Isn't that the truth of life?
Yeah.
If I say anything politically incorrect, please forgive me. I can't help it. I'm disabled.
And again, brilliant. But did you make a conscious decision to handle it that way and not to look backwards and to look forwards?
I think that I'd been very blessed that up until that point, my life was about seeking wisdom, and it still is. It's about learning for all of us. And so I'd learned that, bitterness doesn't work. The price of not forgiving is too high to pay. Look, I'm a big boy. I went out to do what I did because I believed it was the right thing to do. I never thought it would happen to me, and no operator ever does think it'll happen to them. But it did, and it was a little bit like a lightning strike. It was so unlikely, but it happened. I'm pleased that no more of my guys were injured. And from now on, I'm incredibly lucky to be alive. So it's about making the best of it. And, absolutely, I choose to walk in the sunshine because we have a choice in life. If you think of someone who's bitter, all of us have things we could be bitter about. But actually, it destroys us from the inside out. And I'm not saying it's easy because it isn't always easy, but the price of negativity is too high to pay.
That's wonderful. So when you had your, let's call it an accident, you lost a lot of blood, but you also lost your lower right leg and your arm, which in fact you've shown us your hook. If anybody's watching the video, if you're on the podcast, you won't know that. What was the prognosis after this incident? What did the doctors say you would be able to do and not do?
Interesting, because the doctor was very careful not to say what you could and couldn't do. And he's a wonderful guy. There were plenty of other people who said, you'll never run again. And I think a few days after I was blown up, I remember saying that I was going to do the London Marathon less than a year after leaving hospital. And it was shortly afterwards they sent a psychiatrist to come and talk to me. So I was surprised in many respects that many of my friends and family said Chris Moon's life is over. Because if you think about it, his hobby's running. He absolutely lives for his work clearing landmines, and he can't do that anymore. And so I thought, well, actually, I've accepted what happened to me with good grace, and I will make the best of life. I'm not going to let this drag me down. So there were all sorts of limits being imposed, and I didn't get upset about it. I just decided that I would stick with the people that I knew that were positive and not be dragged down by the naysayers.
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, you've been quoted as saying that the biggest limits in life are those we impose on ourselves, often without realizing it. Actually, it was other people imposing it on you because you never imposed those. But what are the strategies that you think we could use, other people could use, to help, challenge our own limiting beliefs?
Great questions. Recognize that the biggest limits in life are genuinely those that we impose on ourselves or have imposed upon us, often without realizing it. So much of what we do and how we challenge ourselves is rooted in the power of belief. A simple example, I remember at school having a French teacher who said I wasn't good at French. Well, many years later, when I was speaking French to people I was working with, I mentioned this and they said, but your French is really good. And so I'd given myself that limiting belief because I accepted it. And all of us have examples like that. But at the same time, I preach reality. We have to be totally realistic. And if you want an example of blind positivity, I don't believe in that. And I know lots of people in my profession do. And I respect that view, but I don't. Everything starts with reality. We have to be totally realistic. And if you want an example of blind positivity, watch the early stages of The X Factor.
Lovely. Yeah, brilliant. Okay. Well, what about when you're leading other people and you want to take those people beyond their limiting beliefs? What can leaders do to get?
Great question. Okay, firstly, take the time to get to know your people. Treat them with respect, listen to them, and understand what are the things that are holding them back. Give them a vote of confidence. Great leaders enable people to do things that they didn't think they could do. So give people encouragement. It has to be realistic. You have to really understand what is going on. And of course, that's hard work. But then get people to recognize, if you truly think that they can do something, that actually most people are far more capable than we realize. It is about creating the right conditions to allow those seeds of confidence to germinate. And so we need to put them in the sunlight. We need to water them and give them nutrition. And we all need a little encouragement. And then people blossom.
Yeah, no, brilliant. Really wise words. And I mean, the other area I think that's really relevant with what you've been through is resilience, I suppose. And it seems to me that more and more you have to be resilient with everything that's going on in the world. We're literally overloaded, we're bombarded with change, we've got uncertainty, we're facing all sorts of things. Do you agree that resilience is really important?
I think resilience is a little understood subject. It's been studied in great detail, but I think that we don't understand a huge amount about resilience. I think it is massively important. I have seen people who I thought were afraid of nothing actually collapse at some really quite minor things. And I think that there is some truth in the statement, it's the last straw that breaks the camel's back. And that straw can be tiny. So we've got to understand that we need to recharge our psychological batteries. I do a huge amount of work on resilience, actually. Everything I do comes from three angles. I've got stacks of experience on the balance of life and death and on the limit of human endurance and what's useful about those experiences in terms of understanding resilience. Any pretense we might have as human beings is stripped away. Did my master's in human behavior. I've done lots of work with the business schools and psychologists and psychiatrists. So there's academic rigor to the principles that I share, but it's all common sense. And the problem with common sense is it's not always very common.
You're very passionate about this. I can hear it in your voice and see it in your body language there. This obviously the resilience thing is super important. What can we do to increase our resilience? Can you give us some tips?
Yes. Firstly, we need to understand ourselves. The first thing I say to people is, look, what are the things that are damaging your resilience? What are the things that are dragging you down? What are the things you do that you hate doing? Get rid of those things. And if people are dragging you down, you need to create your own personal firewall in whatever way that is, to actually really preserve your positivity and not to get drained. So those are the first things to do. Work out what it is that's dragging you down and damaging your resilience. Put in place your own firewall. So one of the simple techniques that I use with people is say to them, look, imagine yourself with a bubble around you. Do you remember Star Trek?
Yes.
Well, Star Trek, the Starship Enterprise, shields up. We need to put our shields up to stop things sucking our positivity away, and also to actually preserve our resilience. That's one simple technique. The next thing is find out what it is that recharges our psychological batteries. I did something with a bit of the British government that sends people to the most challenging places, and frequently they operate alone. And I met a wonderful man, a naval psychologist, a clinical psychologist. He did a study on how people coped when they got back from some of the most challenging places in the world. What was fascinating was that he said, well, you can guess what my first question was, is there a model for resilience and people coping? And he said, well, yes and no. But what I found out from my study was actually there isn't a model. You can't teach it. People must find their own way. So, for example, I go walking with my dogs and I focus on the people in my life who truly love me, like my Labrador. And so
Labradors love anybody that feeds them, though. That's the problem.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you for popping my bubble.
Sorry.
So anyway, look, we've got to find our own way. I run. That's really good. That recharges my batteries. Do gardening. Now, there's some interesting research that people who are gardeners live longer. People with dogs apparently live 7 years longer. And I don't think it's actually the exercise. This is one of the theories, because you have to take your dog for a walk. I don't think it's just the exercise. I think that dogs give us unconditional love. And so consequently, that recharges our psychological batteries. But for each of us, it'll be different. And people must find their own way. But also comes back to the point, you know, don't let yourself get dragged down.
Yeah. So you touched on your running, and people might not know that, yes, you did do the London Marathon within a year of your accident. You completed it. You've also completed some of the toughest ultra marathons. And in fact, you were the world's first amputee distance runner. So what drives you personally to take on these incredible challenges?
There are lots of reasons, more important than me. Firstly, I knew that there had to be a positive to being blown up. So a couple of days afterwards, when I was in intensive care, I thought, actually, if I can do the London Marathon less than a year after leaving hospital and work with the charity, I'll be able to raise a lot of money to help people in Cambodia who've lost limbs. And then that worked really well. And of course, more than 20 years ago, artificial limbs, nothing like as good as they are now. So I was told that someone like you can't do that. So I worked out that if I did the ultras, firstly, what I would be doing is challenging the concept of limitation around prosthetics and people with disabilities. I could raise a lot of money for the charities I was involved with. And also, life's about making the best of it. I didn't want to be beaten by the badness that I've sometimes experienced. And it's about getting out there and doing the best we can. So that simply was what it was all about.
Yeah, brilliant. So you were invited to go to speak into companies. Obviously, we've touched on various topics. We've touched on leadership, limiting beliefs. We've touched on resilience. We talked about, drive, purpose, that kind of stuff. What are the things that you're seeing more and more with clients? What are they asking you to come and help them with?
I do a lot of work around change and resilience at the moment. And that's probably the thing that people want the most at the moment. I also do a lot of work around health and safety behaviours. It's a subject that's very difficult to energise people on, and I'm very passionate about it. And so I've got lots of humorous experiences that I can share that really make the point of the human cost of accidents. And I do some quite serious stuff around behavioural change, and also I've run a lot of workshops. So, there is a huge requirement at the moment for people to have a bit of sunshine, to absolutely understand how to deal with change and uncertainty, because we do live in challenging times, but recognizing also that there's a lot we can do to be resilient. So that's pretty much what people are mostly dealing with at the moment.
Brilliant. And speaking of sunshine, I think one of the best books I've read is your book, One Step Beyond. You're a brilliant storyteller, and people listening to this will be able to see and hear how eloquent you are. So I've got a question from my mum to finish on. She's a big fan. She wants to know when the next book's coming out.
It's much to my shame that I haven't written it, and I do need to write it. So I'll go and start right now.
I'm going to tell her that. I'm going to tell her you said that. Okay, brilliant.
Right,
Chris,
well,
Chris,
not much pressure there then.
Lots of pressure. You know my mum. So Chris, thank you so much for your time. That's been great fun to talk to you.
Well, lovely to speak to you, and thank you to everyone who's listening. Have a wonderful day.